Hey guys, it's Bunske. Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a longer conversation with Celine, who is also a creator on YouTube. Celine makes a bunch of useful content for both beginners and intermediate learners of Japanese. So go over to her channel and check that out. She has loads of videos on her channel where she shares the studying approaches that she uses, the apps, the books, the software, all of it. So please go check out her channel and make sure to subscribe. Now, Celine is from Germany. She's 26. She has been studying Japanese for 3 years and recently passed N4. I am 36. I've been studying Japanese for 18 years and I passed N1 back in 2012. And because of these differences and our age gap, and because we started studying Japanese at different times, we thought it'd be interesting to compare our studying methods, our approaches to language learning. What are some of the differences in approaches that we take? Which resources do we use? What is our attitude towards digital learning and automation of some of that learning process? How do we read books? How do we retain information such as kanji and vocabulary? All of these topics will come up in our conversation today. So hope you enjoy. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and head over to Celine's channel for the first part of this conversation. And with me today is Celine. Hi, Celine. Who are you?
Hi, I'm actually German. I'm 26 and I've been studying Japanese for around like 3 years. And I also dabbled in Japanese before, like when I was in my teens, but I never took it really seriously until like recently. And I just passed the N4. And I also want to go to Japan to a language school next year. So this will be really exciting.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So today we're going to discuss various topics. We're going to do it like podcast style a little bit. And so one of the halves will be on Celine's channel, the other half will be on my channel. So make sure to check out both channels and to subscribe to keep up to date, because maybe, who knows, if you like this, we'll do more collaborations.
Yeah. So let's start. What was your experience taking the JLPT back then? So you told me that you took your N1 in 2012. Do you think there was any like difference between now and then?
Actually, it's pretty similar, but I think what they mostly changed, I don't know if this was already different when I took it, but I think they changed the way the listening part was structured. Because I remember the kind of complaint of the JLPT and companies who were demanding that people take N1 before they start working there, was that a lot of people who came from kanji-based languages or countries were able to pass the exam based solely on the fact that they knew kanji very well. But in the end, they wouldn't be able to speak or read Japanese very well. So I think that's kind of why they restructured JLPT. And I think I was kind of maybe in the transition between those two things. I'm not really sure when the actual change happened, but I haven't taken it for a long time. But I do proctor sometimes for JLPT. I sit in the listening exam, and I feel that it's much more practical now. So now you hear something, and then you have to give the proper response, or you have to choose the proper response from 1, 2, or 3. And I think that didn't exist back in the day. So now it's more about, it's very simple, I feel, especially for N1. I feel that the level of reading is much higher than the levels of listening. But you do have to have some kind of feeling for the language, the spoken language, in order to pass that part of the exam.
Okay, that's interesting to know, definitely. And what level of JLPT did you do, and how long did you study for each level?
I only did N1, and I studied 2 days for N1.
2 days. Wow.
Yeah, so the reason why that happened is, so I didn't want to take JLPT, but the university, I was applying for Japanese grad school, and all of a sudden they emailed me saying, well, do you have N1? And I said, no, I don't have N1. And they said, oh, that's a problem. You have to have N1 to be admitted to grad school here. And I said, well, but I already did a year on as an exchange student in the program. Doesn't that kind of prove that I'm already able to do it? And they said, well, maybe it does, but we still need you to take N1 and pass. And back in the day, we didn't have JLPT in Holland, so I had to go to Germany.
Yay.
And jump on a train. Yeah, maybe, we passed each other on the street somewhere.
Probably.
I still remember that the German organization of JLPT was very kind, because I think the registration had already ended, but I explained the situation. They said, okay, just send us the money. And as soon as the money is here, your place is confirmed. And it took like over a week, but they said, oh, just don't worry, it's fine. Just come and it'll be okay. But Amazon Japan back then wasn't as fast as it is today. So I ordered the books, they arrived like 3 days before the test. So I only had
Wow.
time on the train to study. But at
Yeah.
that point, I had already been studying Japanese for 6 years, or maybe 7 years already. And 2 of those were spent in Japan. And one of those years was spent in a Japanese grad school program for Japanese students who were studying Japanese literature. So it was very hardcore. It wasn't some kind of Yugakusei program. I was already past that point. And so taking N1 was just a quick glance at all the, what they call grammar points. I still don't agree that that's grammar actually, but what they call bunpo, and I passed. I don't really remember the marks I got. Maybe it was terrible, but all I cared about was just passing so I could go to grad school.
Great.
Yeah.
And I think the next question will be a bit difficult to answer then, but I still want to ask it because it also came from a viewer of mine. Yep. And do you have any like secret tips to pass the JLPT as fast as possible?
Well, get
like in 2
very
days.
good at Japanese before you take the test, so that you don't really have to study for it. But I think if you have only, like, say, a few weeks left, I still remember the bulk of the test is reading. So just get the kanji and the kind of vocabulary stuff out of the way as quickly as you can, and then make sure you have a lot of time for the reading. But I always tell people to remember that JLPT is only a benchmark for JLPT. It doesn't per se say something about your actual Japanese level in a practical way. So, even if you fall asleep during the listening test, and you will because it's very slow and you've already done 3 hours before that, just remember that it's more a test of stamina rather than a test of your Japanese. So don't worry about it too much. But I think, most people who do like N2, N1 want to use it in some kind of professional capacity. And in those cases, I would say just train your reading speed as much as you can so that you have enough time for all the reading. People just usually don't finish the reading section because it's so much. One of the ways in which you can train your reading is make sure that you know all the so-called setsuzokushi, all those kind of little words that usually are at the beginning of a paragraph that indicate what kind of paragraph that is and how it relates to the previous paragraph. If you have like a good feel for that, you can easily identify the structure of a text, and then it's much easier to find the information that you need. Look at the questions first, then look for the information based on the structure of the text, and then read as much as you need to answer the question. I would always use this ranking of importance.
That's great, because this was also a question, like, what reading strategies do you have? So great that you answered that. So let's go into the topic of learning Japanese, like the differences and like learning Japanese in general, maybe. So many people often struggle to get from a lower intermediate level to a higher intermediate level, and they feel this plateau and they can't seem to progress, or they don't know how. Like, how do you cope with this?
Sure. Well, actually, let me ask you the same question back, because you said, well, you passed N4 and you're now going towards N3. And N3 is usually kind of the level where people start to struggle a little bit, where you finish maybe the regular kyokasho like Genki or Minna no Nihongo or stuff like that, or you use the JLPT books and you think, well, but at some point there must be more than this, and you struggle to take the next step. Is that something you experience as well?
Kind of. I wouldn't really say I'm on a plateau, but yeah, I also used the Genki books and I already finished those, of course. I also like did a lot of JLPT books, like the Nihongo Challenge books and stuff like this. And right now I'm using the quartet books, which are for intermediate Japanese. I think they're also from the same like publisher that also did the Genki books. And I think it's really nice. So I don't feel like I have a shortage of resources I could use. So on that end of the learning spectrum, everything is fine.
Yeah.
But I start to get a bit bored kind of with the textbook stuff. And I feel like I don't have so much drive to study anymore like I had at the
Mm.
beginning, because now it's really getting like more technical kind of.
Yeah,
Like when it comes to grammar and stuff. And I also want to finally progress on with speaking, because I can't really speak a lot, and I also can't really understand a lot of like spoken Japanese, especially in the JLPT. It was a big struggle of mine. So in this like kind of area in Japanese, I struggle like quite a bit, and I also don't know like what to do about it right now. So I would say this is maybe my plateau kind of. But maybe it's not that I don't know what to do. I don't want to take the steps because they're scary.
Well, I think that's part of it, and I think it's a kind of multi-layered issue. But I always feel that when people talk about a plateau, I think it might be one of two things, and I think based on which one it is, you need to deal with it in different ways. So if you've just been burning yourself out and just doing all this work and you feel that you're plateauing, I think it's fine to just take a break. And people are always scared that they'll forget things that they've learned. But actually, speaking from my own experience, you won't forget as much. I mean, you'll forget a word here and there, but I think the hard work you'll put in, you have put in until that point, will get a chance to kind of settle down in your brain, and you'll kind of, by doing something completely different, I don't know, go exercise, or even if it's a longer break, like a month off, I think it will benefit your Japanese learning in the long run, because your brain will kind of get a chance to deal with everything that it's learned over the past months or year or maybe even longer. And so if you're in need of a break, just take a break. It's fine. But if, let's say, as is the case with you, that you're getting bored because you're doing the same thing over and over again, I think it's fine to kind of change your methods a little bit. But it's easier said than done, right? Because you've been using the same method for a long time, but what alternatives are there? And for me, so the first 2 years of my studies, I had just been studying from books. So we had one of those kyokasho, but not Genki, not Minna no Nihongo, but one that was made by a professor from our own university. So it was very technical. And this was back in the day when people were still expected to be very proficient in Latin and stuff like that. So a lot of the explanations were kind of in comparison to Latin grammar. And it was very, very old. But it was very kind of decent and sound. That's kind of the way I studied. But at some point, of course, that becomes boring. And I was lucky because that was exactly the moment that I went to Japan for my first year. And I remember not doing any book learning during that year, or almost, like the bare minimum that was required for the classes. But if you've been to Japan and you've been in one of those ryugakusei program, you know that those programs are not super demanding, generally speaking. And then outside of that, I just went into the city. I was in Osaka, and so I went to Umeda or Namba or somewhere, and I would just go to bars and restaurants and speak with the people around me. And that was such a different kind of, first of all, it's a different skill, but also it's a very different way of studying, and you get such a different perspective on the language if you do that. And in the long run, that made my reading ability a lot better as well, because you get used to how people say things instead of learning it from a grammar book, which is, of course, usually not how people say things. I always feel that grammar books, especially if you're learning from English, is just there to point out to you how Japanese is structurally different from English. So how the language functions on a grammatical level, but it's not there to help you become like a native speaker or something like that. So that's the way I did it. I just did like a complete 180 in my approach, and that really, really helped. And I know it's difficult to do if you're not in Japan, but going from textbooks to maybe TV shows or dramas or something like that is already a way in which you kind of can change your routine or kind of the rut that you're in around.
I also think like when people talk about a plateau, like a lot of people also mean like if they are already like watching the shows and listening to the podcast and they understand everything, and it's not like so like they don't need so much energy to do things like in Japanese, or like they can have basic level conversations. I think also there are people who want to go above that. And do you know like a way how they can do it, like except for going to Japan?
Well, that's the tough part, right? Because that's how I did it usually. I went to Japan, and it was lucky that I was in an environment that was possible and sponsored, which also helps.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, if you get scholarships, I mean, get a scholarship to Japan. That's always a good way to get in. First of all, they'll take care of your visa, and second of all, they'll pay you. The few things that you could do is maybe look for a community of Japanese people in your environment, and if that's not there, maybe look for certain communities online, whether they be of Japanese people or people learning Japanese, that are basically of the same level or a little bit above, and that kind of the connection with other people or kind of sharing how you struggle with certain things will already help you kind of overcome certain hurdles, I think. But yeah, of course, there are also limits to what you can do if you stay in your own country or in your own environment. So changing the environment the best you can, I think, is maybe the most efficient way.
Yeah, those are great tips.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
And is there something that is commonly recommended to like Japanese learners that you would recommend against? So false learning information, kind of?
Yeah, I guess so. Some people, especially in the online language learning community, and especially in the immersion community, feel that you shouldn't do output until you're finished inputting or something like that.
True, I
And
also heard this.
yeah, I completely disagree with that. So the reason I'm able to speak Japanese fairly well is because I've been speaking Japanese from the third month of my studies. Because after the third month, I was like, well, I'm not getting any better by not speaking, so I might as well make some Japanese friends. And I found some Japanese exchange students at my university, and I just hung out with them a lot. And I made a fool of myself every single day because I made all the mistakes, and they would laugh at me or with me or both. But you have to kind of
right?
get through that. And I've also heard people say like, oh, you have to know all the words, all the grammar, all the nuances of Japanese before you can read your first novel in Japanese, because if you don't do that, then your first experience, your kind of immediate experience of the novel will be ruined. And it's like, what the hell is that? I completely disagree. So I did a lot of work with Natsume Soseki, and my professor in Japan was one of the most famous Soseki scholars in Japan, and he was also one of the editors on the so-called Soseki Zenshu, so the collected works. So he knows a lot about Soseki. And so I asked him, I was like, well, there are people who say this. What do you feel? And he said, well, so he was turning 70 when I asked him this. He said, well, I reread Soseki's novels every year because every time I read them, I find something new in them. And I thought, well, if a native speaker who is one of the foremost scholars on the topic still rereads them because he discovers new things each time, then it's fine for anybody to kind of do that. It's even fine to treat a novel as kind of a linguistic project where you think, okay, I'm just going to puzzle my way through the first chapter in order to get my level at a certain point, and to just get used to the language and the style and the word usage and kind of the entire kind of atmosphere of the novel in order to get better. Because if you're very good at reading Soseki, that's no guarantee that you're very good at reading Murakami, because that's a very different style, right? And so for me, the only way to get better at that is by doing it. And so I think not doing it until you're able to do it is not only bad advice, but it also doesn't really make sense to me. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are afraid that they will learn their own mistakes, like, for example, by writing something and then not getting corrections and like internalizing their own like mistakes. But I think as long as you get like an outside source of like someone who corrects your things, like from HelloTalk, italki, I don't know, like,
yeah,
or maybe a friend, like a Japanese friend you have around town, I think then it's fine, right?
Yeah, it should be fine. I mean, so for me, the first book I read, it's not even real reading, but kind of the first Japanese novel I used as a puzzle for getting my Japanese level up was I think a novel by Murakami Ryu. And I I spent my entire summer, so like, and it's a Dutch university summer, so almost 3 months, trying to read this novel. And I only got to page like 100 or 120. I didn't even finish. I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere because I was, learning all the words and using all the dictionaries, and I didn't feel like I knew what it said still after, knowing all the words. That was very frustrating to me. I still persevered. I did like 5 hours a day for 3 months. But then when I
Wow.
returned to university, all of the struggles that I had in my first year kind of disappeared because all of the things that I was doing over the summer were so much more difficult than the stuff that we were doing in our second year at university, that I thought that was the moment where I was like, oh, okay, it did have significance, even though I didn't understand everything. But because I kind of struggled through it, some of it just sticks. And because that's such a slow process, you don't notice it. And that also leads to frustration, right? Because you're thinking, I'm putting in all this effort, but it's not really working out. But then afterwards, you notice, if you return to something that you found difficult before, then you notice, oh, wait, it's actually, I'm much further along than I thought. And the other thing you mentioned is also true. So if you have like a language learning community where you can ask questions without fear of repercussions or being ridiculed or something, so a constructive community of people, or even better, if you have a tutor that will sit you down and just read one-on-one with you, so that's also what I do during my lessons, is to kind of emulate the experience I had with the professor I just mentioned, which is sitting down in a room together and just going through a text line by line, and me being able to ask questions to this person who's so much more knowledgeable than I am, was a very good experience for me, because I could just ask everything from words to kind of cultural issues to, it didn't matter. I could ask him anything. And that was such a valuable experience. So if you can find either a community or a tutor, it should be fine. Yeah. Even if you feel that you're not making progress, you're making progress.
And when I talked to you before, like we had a little talk the other day, you seem to be quite passionate about like learning offline, so not using so much or like not using so many apps and websites. Can you explain why you feel that way?
Sure. Well, I'm not against using apps or websites at all. I think, whatever helps you master this very difficult language is fair play. So it doesn't piss me off when people say, "Oh, I use all the apps," and or I live inside of the Anki universe. It doesn't matter to me as long as you kind of are happy with that, and you feel that is helping you towards your goal. I think it's absolutely fine. But the reason I think I don't use those things is because, first of all, they weren't around when I was first starting out, and so I'm kind of stuck in my ways. That's part of it, I think. But the other part of it is when I see how some of these kind of technological advances are fulfilling a certain role in language learning, I don't see how it really helps people learn. So, for instance, if there's an application or software that takes subtitles from Netflix in Japanese and automatically inputs them in Anki, I would be the person that would just go like, "Oh, I have these, so I don't really have to do anything anymore." Just having Hemingway's fountain pen would already make me feel like Hemingway enough not to write. And so so just having kind of the option of just doing that automatically would already make me quite lazy. And I know that it's not the case for everybody, but for me, the process of writing things down and looking things up in a dictionary, in a paper dictionary, that process really helps me remember. Because I think it's a more, not to get too philosophical, but a more embodied thing. If people have the argument that, oh, you don't need to be able to write kanji because that's not how society works anymore, it's completely valid. But for me, the writing of a kanji is not so that I can write the kanji. It's for me to remember it and to kind of really connect to it in a very direct way. And I feel that is kind of taken away from you if you're using kind of software that automates everything. So that's why I don't use it, because I don't know how it would make my life easier. But what's your experience with this? I'm very curious to hear, because I imagine just by the sheer fact that you are 10 years younger than I am,
Yeah.
you automatically are thrusted into an environment where you use apps to learn or use apps to do anything. So what's your experience with this, and how do you kind of balance using paper versions of things versus automated things in digital learning environments? I'm kind of curious.
Well, I have a really mixed experience because when I first started learning Japanese, I was in uni and I learned 6 months in my uni class. And I didn't know about the whole Japanese community, apps, websites. I don't know. I didn't know like anything. Like I didn't even know SRS. So I was completely a noob, like when it comes to those things.
Right.
And I kind of struggled my way through the 6 months and I got like a good grade, but I thought it was like so hard to learn Japanese and to remember the things. And I first discovered like a vocabulary app. Like it was also kind of SRS, but also not really like. But it was more like the Leitner system. I think it's also like SRS based, but a bit different maybe. And I thought it was fine, but I wasn't a big fan of it. And then after I graduated from uni, I studied Japanese by myself. So I had to definitely adapt other methods because I didn't have someone who sat me down and talked me like through the textbook. And I didn't know what to do, so I quit for a few months because it was just too hard to do everything by myself and offline. Right. And then I just magically discovered the Japanese learning community. I don't even know like how anymore, but I saw a post on Instagram, I think. And then I also discovered like Julienne's account, like with the mini immersion weekend. And I thought to myself, oh yeah, let's do an Instagram account about learning Japanese because this will motivate me. And this was kind of a like introduction to everything online, because then I also learned about like all the apps that are out there. I learned about Anki. I discovered language learning videos on YouTube, and I also decided to make my own YouTube channel about this. Yeah. And I gotten to know a lot of apps and also websites that are really useful. Like, for example, I really love like online dictionaries, because it's of course way easier to have like a solid dictionary. And I also used to move around quite a lot within Germany, so I didn't want to accumulate so many physical things, because like when I look at your books behind you, I think they're all dictionaries, right? This is I mean those ones,
these are this is one kanji dictionary. It's 13 volumes.
And that's why I didn't want to have so many books. And I think like the online resources definitely have a lot of potential, but they can also become very overwhelming because there are just so many. And sometimes I also find myself using so many apps that I don't really know which one to use on a regular basis anymore, because I divide my attention to so many different things because there are so many possibilities, which is of course great, but also a bit counterproductive for my learning experience kind of. But I really like Anki, for example, and there are also like one or two other apps I don't want to be without. So I think those are great bases. Like if you have like maybe one or two apps you use on a daily basis, but also use like offline things like books, for example, and for example, reading materials, I like to have them more in an offline version because I just like the feeling of books in my hands, because I'm also a big like bookworm. But I also like Kindle, for example, because it makes it a lot more accessible for you to read books, even as a beginner, because you can just tap on a word and then you get the translation. Right. But it also kind of takes away the struggle that you also talked about. So you don't have to put so much effort in to really recognize what is being said in the text, because you can just take the easy way out. So it's also not the most effective probably when it comes to learning. The apps that you don't want to go without, you mentioned one or two. Which ones are those? I think people would love to know. Oh, so it's Anki. Anki, I put like everything in Anki, like a vocabulary, but I also put grammar sentences in. And I think this was like a really great thing to do, because I not that great at grammar, but having grammar sentences to translate myself, like I put them in German and also in Japanese, so I have to do both ways. So I also have to translate it into the Japanese version, and I can check myself if I understood the grammar point right.
Right.
And then I also have the app Learn Japanese Kanji.
Okay.
I think this is really popular right now on Instagram.
Okay.
And
I
yeah, I saw a lot of people using it. I really like it because it's also like a spaced repetition system, and it also makes you draw the kanji. And I'm also a big fan of drawing kanji and learning the stroke order, not just remembering how it looks. And the other one I really like is Props. This is also a vocabulary app. And you have a lot of different languages. I think they have over like 40 different languages.
Wow.
And you have like 5 minutes a day, and you will discover new vocabulary based on a topic you are choosing. And they have a lot of really colorful images, and they also have someone who reads the word to you,
right,
so that you know how it's pronounced.
And by the way, it's not that I don't use apps at all. So there are a few websites and apps that I do use, but the
Which
apps
ones
that
are
I
those?
use are all dictionaries, and they're not free, but I use kind of Japanese dictionaries on my phone because a phone is always there, and you can you can use them offline as well. So I use the Shinmeikai Kokugo Jiten a lot, and the Iwanami Kokugo Jiten, and then also the Shinjigen, I think it's called, for kanji. So it's a kanji dictionary, which is really good. And then website-wise, I think it's called the Hinoki Project, and they have multiple databases, but the one I use the most is called Natsume. And there you can input nouns or adjectives or verbs, and then see how they're used in combination with different words or different particles or in certain sentences. And that's really, really useful. So maybe we can link to that in the description below.
So do you use any spaced repetition system for yourself, or
yeah, reading books?
Reading books.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is always my argument. Like if you read a lot, that's its own spaced repetition, because if a word is a frequently used word, it will come up again in the text or in some other book. I think I talked about this in one of my other videos, but I'm also okay with forgetting words. It's just part of the process. And, sometimes I really am convinced that I'm seeing a word for the first time ever. And then it turns out that, I saw the same word 2 weeks ago. But, but that's just part of it.
So just doing like input and output, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. All kinds of input. So when I read, it's a lot of literature, but when I watch shows, it's the lowest of the lowest. I just want to relax. So I watch a lot of Getsuyo kara yofukashi, and you get a lot of vocabulary that you wouldn't get from high literary text.
So you're basically studying vocabulary and grammar through more of a passive way, kind of.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it passive. I think reading is still kind of an active skill. I know what you mean in the sense that it's not writing, and then the active way I deal with it is looking it up. I always use 3 dictionaries to compare different ways of how those dictionaries explain the word. And I read out loud, because that's the way I hold myself accountable. Because at some point, your Japanese will be good enough to just glance over things and think, oh, yeah, I already know what this says. I don't really need to go into details. But if you're reading out loud, you can't run away. That's how I stay active during what's usually called a passive skill.
And do you think there's also another part of your learning style that differs from the typical textbook online learning community style?
I think my consistent adherence to just read. So because people always ask me, it's like, but what else do you have any secret hacks or whatever? It's like, no, sometimes it sucks, and you just have to read more, and without knowing what it says or understanding it, but then trusting in the process. I guess that's something I could say, is seeing it as a process rather than as kind of an ultimate goal. Whatever that goal may be, right? So for some people it's JLPT, for others it's speaking like a native speaker. But once you reach that goal, you kind of find that, oh, there's so much more still to do. It's like people saying, I think I'll be tired of life at 70. And then they reach 70 and they think, I'm just getting started. So much more stuff I want to do. So for me, the goal is doing it as often as I can and as much as I can and as deeply as I can. And the way I do it is by using it in for things that I think are fun. So I really enjoy reading, and so I read as much as I can. I really enjoy chatting with people, and so I go out and speak to as many people as I can. And now, kind of the skill is no longer practicing, but it's actually using it to have an enjoyable time. And to get to that point, I know from experience is tough, but it's also very rewarding. And it's not like linear, it goes all over the place, and it's not like one specific point to which you're working. It's you have multiple gradations of that enjoyment. So usually I tell people, just what is it you want to do with Japanese? Is it reading? Is it speaking? Is it reading a newspaper? Is it reading a novel? Is it, working for a Japanese company? And based on that answer, I tell them, go do that as soon as you can, because that's the only way to get good at the thing that you want to do. Yeah.
I think this is a really liberating approach, because I think there's a lot of like narrow-mindedness when it comes to like learning Japanese and the path on how you should do it, kind of.
What is that? So I really want to ask you, what is the kind of path that kind of the larger community, or maybe the unspoken rule, is dictating? Because I'm not aware of it, because I don't, it goes right past me. But I'm sure that you have to somehow deal with that kind of input or information on a daily basis. So what is the thing that's being dictated, and how do you kind of deal with it?
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just like the people I surround myself with. Of course, you are always in a bubble, so I can't speak like for the whole language learning community. But I oftentimes see like the JLPT as the, like, you have to do this kind of learning style, and this is how you can prove that you are like good at Japanese. And if you don't have the JLPT, then you're not like good, because you can't like prove it, kind of. Like, I mean, you could maybe prove it with speaking really fluently, but I think like the JLPT is always the like really big focus point that's hanging over everyone's head.
Yeah. So do you feel that pressure as well?
Kind of, because I'm also like in the content creator niche, kind of, and a lot of people that watch my channel also like JLPT stuff, and probably it also has to do with the like nowadays more like toxic productivity, and you can really measure your progress when it comes to the JLPT, and you can be like, okay, this is the date, this is what I have to learn, and this is how much I have to learn each day and each week, and if I don't do it, I'm a failure. Like kind of along those lines. And if you use like more of an immersion-based approach, or like the reading-based approach, it's more like I feel like easy going approach, because you don't have a certain like point where you have to be at a certain time. Or maybe, I mean, you could set one for yourself and say, I want to read a Murakami book in Japanese from cover to cover like next year, maybe. Of course, you can set yourself those goals, but those are not the goals that like everyone seems to have. Like, it's kind of, sometimes it feels a bit like peer pressure, to be honest. Like to go on to the next level right away, because when I also made my video about like the JLPT, how it was to take it for the first time, because the N4 was my first time, a lot of people asked me in the comments, and when are you taking the N3? Like, are you taking it the next summer, like, well, the next winter? And I was like, no. I felt a bit like weird to saying that I don't know when I want to take the JLPT next, because I felt really under pressure when I was taking it like the summer. But this was also because I got recommended to take it for the visa process when it comes to the language schools, because apparently it will help if you prove that you have a certain proficiency in Japanese. This will help to get you like in the country. And So it was like, I have to pass. Really have to pass. And it was like so much pressure. And I don't want this, like that
Mm,
for the next time.
yes.
So I also try right now to find a balance between kind of going to the N3, but also doing a lot of other things and
Mm,
also learning the things that I want to learn and not
mm.
the things that a textbook is telling me, because a lot of times I see vocabulary in the JLPT books and I'm like, why should I learn this? I don't need these words in German. Like, why would I care to know them in Japanese?
No, I get what you mean. I was also kind of wondering as I was listening to your answer, like what do you think is behind the question of your viewers or just people who stumble upon your content when they ask you, it's like, when are you taking the next one? When are you taking the next level? Do you think that that's pressuring you into taking it, or is there just a general atmosphere of people needing to take the next one as soon as possible? So I always feel that if you're kind of a content creator and people get used to your presence online, or people get used to seeing your face on their feed, that they kind of see you as a place to turn to for questions and advice. And so maybe it was them asking for your permission to take it easy. If you say,
True. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
taking it this summer, but maybe next summer, then they think, oh, good, then maybe I don't have to do it as fast either.
I think this is a great point of view, because I didn't think about this like the way you phrased it right now.
Mm.
But this is a way better approach, like also to take on for myself, of course. And this is also what I like wanted to say. Like I also did a video like what my plans are after JLPT.
Mm.
Like to just like I kind of felt the need to explain myself, like why I'm not taking the next step right away, and also like tell people it's fine to be slower. But I also see like other people again, like who just did it in like 2 years or 3 years. And I always think to myself, well, I studied Japanese for 3 years and I just passed the N4. What does this say about myself? Like I kind
Right.
of feel like a snail. But
Yeah.
I think this is also great. Like there are also advantages, because I feel even if you did the N1, like maybe you never tried speaking or you never really read a book. And when you are in a situation where you need your Japanese, then I think a lot of people probably would freeze and probably don't even know like how to converse.
Yeah.
But if you take it more slowly and try to like also try speaking, reading, like try to be more well-rounded in your skills and not just focus on the JLPT, that even though it takes a lot longer and it's sometimes a bit uncomfortable, like when it comes to comparing yourself, even though you
Mm.
shouldn't compare yourself, of course. But
Yeah.
I think it's a like natural human instinct to compare
Oh, yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, that this is a way, not the better approach, but I think it's the better, like the best approach for me, at least.
Mm. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people are are in search of kind of the perfect balance in their studies, and also balancing out kind of all the input that they're getting from YouTube, let's say. And if they see a video of some guy getting N1 in just 6 months, from 0 to N1 in 6 months,
True.
then people feel pressured into doing that. And also there seems to be kind of an identity attached to that, like, oh, this person had N1 in 6 months, so he is kind of this kind of Japanese learning god. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know this person, so maybe this person is actually a genius and did master a large portion of Japanese in 6 months. But I would venture a guess that this person is just very good at taking JLPT and missed a lot of very cool stuff along the way just because they only focused on on the JLPT. And for that matter, I went from 0 JLPT to N1 in 2 days. So I can make that video and then make everybody very worried.
Definitely.
But I can also say, make another video, and that's kind of the video that I want to make, or maybe I can talk about it now, is that, I take the longest route possible because of all the things that I pick up along the way. And that's also what I like about library stacks. So our university library changed, unfortunately, where the stacks are hidden for everybody, so you can only get the book that you kind of request from the library. But it used to be the case that if you're a master student or higher, you can go into the stacks and find the book that you're looking for yourself. And it every time the book next to the book that I was looking for would be more interesting than the book I was looking for. And that experience, I take that approach with language learning as well. I just take a longer route and soak up everything. And this is why I think I don't have that many YouTube videos up yet, but some of the comments were like, "Oh, you took 17 years to study Japanese." I mean, I did it in 3. It's in those comments that I really see a difference in approach. Like, what is your goal? Probably JLPT, but maybe something else. And as soon as people reach that goal, it's like, "Oh, I'm fluent." And you probably are fluent, but my goal is not to stop somewhere; it's to keep going. And I think that's a very different kind of approach, which is also why after 18 years, I feel that I still have so much left to do and to learn. I mean, it really depends. It depends on the person. If they want to get to get into a Japanese company and work and live in Japan, then you'll pick up the rest along the way during that journey for sure. So it's functional, right? And for other people, it's like, oh, if I get N1 within a certain amount of time, that will say something about my stamina, ability, kind of intellectual acumen.
Yeah.
And they want to prove it to themselves or maybe the community that they are in. And then it gets really difficult to not compare yourself to others, right? Okay, guys, that was it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As said, the first half of this conversation is on Celine's channel. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this collaboration so I can gauge if this is something you want to see more of. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.